The radio crackled to life in the dimly lit communications room at Pearl Harbor, its static-filled transmission carrying words that would reshape the Pacific theater forever. Commander Joseph Rochefort pressed his headphones closer, his weathered face etched with concentration as he deciphered the intercepted Japanese naval codes. It was May 28, 1942, and America's codebreakers had just unveiled Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's most ambitious gambit yet. "They're coming for Midway," Rochefort announced to the assembled intelligence officers, his voice cutting through the humid Hawaiian air like a blade through silk. The small coral atoll of Midway, sitting lonely in the vast Pacific, had suddenly become the fulcrum upon which the entire war would balance. Admiral Chester Nimitz stood before a massive chart of the Pacific, his steady hands tracing the projected path of the Japanese fleet. The weight of command sat heavily on his shoulders as he contemplated the intelligence report spread across his desk. Yamamoto's plan was audacious in its scope: draw out the remaining American carriers and destroy them in a decisive battle, thereby securing Japanese dominance across the Pacific. It was a strategy born from the same mindset that had delivered devastating success at Pearl Harbor just 6 months earlier. The Japanese admiral's reasoning was sound from a strategic perspective. Following Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle's shocking raid on Tokyo in April, Emperor Hirohito and the Japanese High Command demanded aggressive action to prevent further American attacks on the sacred homeland. Yamamoto saw Midway as the perfect bait, a target so strategically vital that the Americans would be forced to commit their precious remaining carriers to its defense. What Yamamoto could not have anticipated was the breakthrough achieved by Rochefort's cryptanalytic team, working tirelessly in the basement of Pearl Harbor's administration building. These unsung heroes of the intelligence war had cracked the Japanese naval code designated JN-25, providing unprecedented insight into enemy intentions and capabilities. As documented in official Navy communications from this period, the intelligence windfall revealed not just the target and timing of the attack, but also the composition and disposition of the approaching Japanese fleet. 4 aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, would spearhead the assault, supported by battleships, cruisers, and destroyers in numbers that should have guaranteed victory. Admiral Raymond Spruance, aboard the carrier Enterprise, reviewed his orders with characteristic methodical precision. The tactical situation was stark in its mathematical brutality: 3 American carriers against 4 Japanese, with the enemy possessing superior numbers in virtually every category of warship. Yet within this apparent mismatch lay the seeds of opportunity that would define modern naval warfare. The American strategy emerging from these desperate calculations represented a fundamental shift in naval thinking. Rather than relying on the traditional battle line of massive battleships exchanging thunderous broadsides, the coming engagement would be decided by aircraft launched from flight decks hundreds of miles apart. This was warfare stripped to its technological essence: radar against reconnaissance, dive bomber against fighter, intelligence against surprise. The stage was set for a confrontation that would encapsulate every strategic principle governing the broader Pacific conflict. The importance of intelligence gathering, the decisive role of industrial capacity, the value of operational flexibility, and the critical impact of individual courage under impossible circumstances. The pre-dawn darkness of June 3, 1942, hung over the Pacific like a shroud as 2 massive naval armadas moved toward their fateful rendezvous. Admiral Yamamoto stood on the bridge of his flagship Yamato, the world's largest battleship, its massive 18-inch guns gleaming in the moonlight. His plan was a masterpiece of naval coordination, involving over 200 ships deployed across multiple task forces, each with precisely defined roles in the coming symphony of destruction. Yamamoto's strategic thinking reflected the classical Japanese military philosophy of decisive battle, the concept of seeking one overwhelming engagement that would determine the war's outcome. His carriers would strike Midway's airfields and installations, drawing out the American fleet for annihilation. Meanwhile, his invasion force would seize the atoll, providing Japan with an advanced base for future operations against the Hawaiian Islands themselves. The Japanese admiral's confidence was rooted in recent victories that had established his Navy's reputation for invincibility. From Pearl Harbor to the Java Sea, Japanese forces had demonstrated tactical superiority and operational excellence that seemed to render American resistance futile. His pilots were veterans of campaigns across the Pacific, their aircraft bearing the rising sun insignia that had become synonymous with swift, decisive victory. Unknown to Yamamoto, Admiral Nimitz was orchestrating his own careful preparations. 300 miles northeast of Midway, the American commander had positioned his forces based on precise intelligence about Japanese intentions, creating what military historians would later recognize as one of warfare's earliest examples of intelligence-driven positioning. Task Force 16, under Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, and Task Force 17, commanded by Rear Admiral Frank Fletcher, lay in wait like coiled springs. The American tactical approach represented a revolutionary departure from traditional naval doctrine. Instead of seeking a classical gun battle between battle lines, Nimitz planned to strike with aircraft while keeping his vulnerable carriers beyond the range of enemy surface vessels. This strategy required precise timing, exceptional communication, and courage bordering on desperation from pilots flying obsolescent aircraft against proven enemy forces. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, leader of Enterprise's dive bomber squadron, studied aerial photographs of Japanese carriers with the intensity of a scientist examining microscopic specimens. These images, captured by long-range reconnaissance flights, revealed the precise layout of enemy flight decks and the positioning of aircraft that would soon become targets for American dive bombers, as referenced in declassified military reports. From the Naval War College, the American preparation phase demonstrated unprecedented coordination between intelligence gathering, tactical planning, and operational execution. Radio intercepts provided real-time updates on Japanese movements, while code-breaking efforts revealed changes to enemy plans and timing. The island of Midway itself had been transformed into a fortress bristling with defensive preparations. Marine aviators flying Brewster Buffalo fighters and obsolete Vindicator dive bombers knew they faced impossible odds. Yet their mission was clear: absorb the initial Japanese assault and provide early warning for the approaching carrier forces. Captain Mark Mitcher, commanding the carrier Hornet, addressed his assembled aircrew with characteristic bluntness about the odds they faced. These young men, many barely out of flight training, would soon confront the elite of Japanese naval aviation and aircraft that were outclassed in speed, maneuverability, and armament. Yet within their ranks burned the determination that would prove decisive in the coming engagement. The strategic implications of the approaching battle extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Whoever emerged victorious would control the Central Pacific, determining whether Japan could continue its expansion or whether America would begin the long road to Tokyo. The first light of June 4, 1942, painted the Pacific horizon in shades of crimson and gold as Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's carrier strike force approached Midway from the northwest. Aboard the flagship Akagi, flight operations commenced with mechanical precision as 108 aircraft prepared for the opening assault. Zero fighters, Val dive bombers, and Kate torpedo planes filled the morning air with the thunder of radial engines, their formation a testament to Japanese naval aviation's tactical excellence. Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga led the first wave toward Midway, his aircraft silhouetted against the dawn sky like birds of prey seeking their target. The Japanese pilot, a veteran of Pearl Harbor and countless Pacific engagements, had supreme confidence in his mission's success. Intelligence reports suggested Midway's defenses were minimal, manned by inexperienced American forces equipped with obsolete aircraft. The reality awaiting Tominaga's formation was far different from Japanese expectations. Major Floyd Parks, commanding Midway's Marine Fighter Squadron, had positioned his Brewster Buffaloes for maximum defensive coverage, despite their technical inferiority to the approaching Zeros. These Marines understood they were likely flying to their deaths, yet their sacrifice would provide precious minutes for American carrier forces to locate and attack the Japanese fleet. At 0630 hours, radar operators on Midway detected the incoming Japanese formation at 93 miles distance, providing unprecedented warning time that would prove crucial to the battle's outcome. This technological advantage, combined with the intelligence windfall from code-breaking efforts, represented America's primary tactical equalizer against superior Japanese numbers and experience. The first combat engagement erupted as Marine fighters, intercepted the Japanese formation 30 miles from Midway. Captain John Carey, flying one of the few Wildcat fighters available to the Marines, dove into the midst of the Japanese formation with guns blazing. The aerial combat that followed demonstrated both the courage of American pilots and the tactical superiority of Japanese aircraft and training. As documented in official after-action reports filed with Pacific Fleet Headquarters, the initial air combat resulted in devastating losses for the defending Americans. Two-thirds of the Marine fighters were shot down within minutes, their pilots falling victim to the superior performance of Zero fighters and the exceptional skill of Japanese aviators. Yet Tominaga's assault on Midway itself revealed significant problems with Japanese planning and execution. The Coral Atoll's defenses, while numerically inferior, had been positioned with careful attention to overlapping fields of fire and mutual support. Anti-aircraft batteries, manned by Marines who had trained intensively since Pearl Harbor, filled the sky with defensive fire that disrupted Japanese bombing accuracy. Lieutenant Tominaga's radio transmission back to Admiral Nagumo carried ominous implications for Japanese strategy. There is need for a second attack wave. This message would trigger a fatal chain of decisions that would alter the battle's trajectory and ultimately the war's outcome. The tactical situation facing Admiral Nagumo encapsulated the broader strategic challenges confronting Japanese forces throughout the Pacific. While his carriers possessed superior aircraft and experienced pilots, the logistical demands of sustained operations far from home bases were beginning to strain Japanese capabilities. Each aircraft lost, each experienced pilot killed, represented irreplaceable assets in Japan's increasingly stretched military resources. Meanwhile, unknown to the Japanese commander, American carrier forces were racing toward launching position. Admiral Spruance's Task Force 16 had closed to within 200 miles of the enemy carriers, positioning his aircraft for a coordinated strike that would exploit Japanese tactical vulnerabilities. The morning's opening engagements had revealed fundamental truths about Pacific warfare that would govern the remainder of the conflict. Intelligence provided decisive advantages. Technological superiority could overcome numerical disadvantages, and individual courage remained the ultimate determining factor in combat outcomes. Admiral Nagumo faced the most critical decision of his naval career as conflicting reports flooded the bridge of Akagi at 07:15 hours. Lieutenant Tominaga's request for a second strike on Midway demanded immediate attention, yet reconnaissance reports hinted at American naval forces operating somewhere in the vast Pacific expanse. The Japanese admiral's next 30 minutes would determine not only the battle's outcome, but the entire trajectory of the Pacific War. The tactical dilemma confronting Nagumo perfectly illustrated the broader strategic challenges facing Japanese forces throughout their Pacific expansion. His carriers held 93 aircraft armed with armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes, configured for attacks against American warships. Converting these aircraft for a second land-based assault would require at least an hour of intensive work by flight deck crews, leaving his force vulnerable during the critical rearming period. Captain Minoru Genda, Nagumo's brilliant air operations officer, advocated for maintaining the anti-ship armament while conducting search operations to locate the reported American vessels. His reasoning reflected the tactical flexibility that had made Japanese naval aviation the most formidable force in the Pacific. Yet time pressure and conflicting intelligence created an impossible decision matrix. At 07:45 hours, Nagumo made the fatal choice that would doom his carrier force. "Prepare to rearm the attack planes with bombs for another strike against Midway," he ordered, initiating a frantic deck-spotting evolution that would scatter armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes across his carrier's hangar decks. Unknown to the four, Japanese Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey was leading Enterprise's dive bomber squadron through scattered cloud formations toward the enemy fleet's last known position. McCluskey's navigation skills, honed through years of peacetime training, would prove decisive as he made subtle course corrections based on intuition and experience, rather than precise intelligence. The American strike coordination represented both the strengths and weaknesses of hastily assembled task forces operating under extreme pressure. Commander John Waldron, leading Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet, had chosen a different heading than the dive bombers, fragmenting the planned coordinated attack. His 15 Devastator torpedo bombers were flying toward certain destruction, Yet their sacrifice would prove strategically vital. As referenced in official Navy combat reports archived at the Naval Historical Center, Waldron's torpedo attack commenced at 0920 hours with full knowledge of its suicidal nature. The antiquated Devastators, flying low and slow to deliver their weapons, provided perfect targets for Zero fighters diving from superior altitude positions. Ensign George Gay, the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8, watched his squadron mates fall one by one as Japanese fighters methodically destroyed the American formation. His survival, clinging to a seat cushion in the Pacific's warm waters, would provide crucial intelligence about Japanese damage control procedures and tactical responses. The gallant sacrifice of American torpedo squadrons served a strategic purpose that transcended their tactical failure. Japanese fighters, diving to low altitude to engage the torpedo planes, were caught out of position when McCluskey's dive bombers finally located the enemy carriers at 10:24 hours. The scene that greeted McCluskey's pilots epitomized the opportunities created by superior intelligence and tactical flexibility. 4 Japanese carriers steamed in formation, their flight decks crowded with aircraft, fuel lines, and ammunition in various stages of combat preparation. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu presented perfect targets for dive-bombing attacks, their vulnerability increased by the frantic rearming operations ordered by Admiral Nagumo. Lieutenant Dick Best, leading Enterprise's bombing squadron, selected Akagi as his primary target, recognizing the flagship's critical importance to Japanese command and control. Capabilities: his 1,000-pound bomb, delivered from a near-vertical dive through intense anti-aircraft fire, struck directly amidships, igniting the fuel and ammunition scattered across the carrier's hangar deck. The simultaneous attacks on all 3 Japanese carriers within a 5-minute window represented one of warfare's most remarkable tactical achievements. Years of training, months of preparation, and moments of individual heroism converged to transform the Pacific War's strategic balance in less time than a typical coffee break. The transformation of Admiral Nagumo's proud carrier force into floating pyres occurred with shocking rapidity that left Japanese observers stunned by the sudden reversal of fortune. At 10:26 hours on June 4, 1942, 3 of the Imperial Navy's finest aircraft carriers were blazing infernos, their steel hulls twisted by explosions that sent towering columns of black smoke into the pristine Pacific sky. Aboard the stricken Akagi, damage control parties fought desperately to contain fires that had spread throughout the carrier's hangar spaces. The irony was bitter for Japanese sailors who had witnessed their ship's aircraft devastate Pearl Harbor just 6 months earlier. Now their own vessel was experiencing the same terrible destruction they had inflicted upon the American battle. Lying in Hawaii's shallow waters, Captain Taijiro Aoki, commanding the carrier Kaga, made the agonizing decision to abandon ship as uncontrolled fires reached the vessel's ammunition magazines. His crew, the elite of Japanese naval aviation, faced the unthinkable reality of defeat after an unbroken string of victories that had carried them from Pearl Harbor to the Indian Ocean. The sole surviving Japanese carrier, Hiryu, represented Admiral Nagumo's last hope for salvaging victory from catastrophic defeat. Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi, commanding the 2nd Carrier Division, immediately launched every available aircraft in a desperate counterattack against the American task force. His pilots, flying with the courage of warriors facing their final battle, knew they carried the honor of the Imperial Navy on their wings. Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi led 18 dive bombers toward the American carriers, navigating by dead reckoning and burning determination through scattered cloud formations. His target was the carrier Yorktown, which Japanese intelligence incorrectly believed had been sunk during the Battle of the Coral Sea 1 month earlier. The American ship's presence at Midway represented both a tactical surprise and a testament to the rapid repair capabilities of Pearl Harbor's naval shipyard. The attack on Yorktown demonstrated the continuing excellence of Japanese naval aviation despite the morning's devastating losses. Kobayashi's bombers penetrated the carrier's fighter cover and anti-aircraft defenses, scoring 3 direct hits that left the American vessel listing and burning. Yet even this tactical success could not compensate for the strategic disaster that had befallen the Japanese fleet. Admiral Spruance aboard Enterprise, faced his own critical decision as reports of Yorktown's damage reached his flagship. The prudent course would be to withdraw his remaining carriers beyond range of Japanese retaliation, preserving America's precious naval aviation assets for future campaigns. Instead, Spruance chose to continue the attack, launching a second strike against the lone surviving Japanese carrier. As documented in official Pacific Fleet action reports, Lieutenant Earl Gallagher led Enterprise's dive bombers in a final assault on Hiryu that commenced at 1700 hours. The Japanese carrier, isolated and defenseless after losing most of her fighter cover in the morning's engagements, presented a clear target for American bombing accuracy honed through months of intensive training. The destruction of Hiryu marked the effective end of Japanese offensive capability in the Pacific theater. Admiral Yamaguchi, choosing death over the dishonor of survival, went down with his ship as flames consumed the last of Nagumo's once proud carrier force. His sacrifice epitomized the warrior code that had motivated Japanese expansion, but would ultimately prove insufficient against American industrial capacity and strategic flexibility. Captain Richard Fleming, piloting a Marine dive bomber from Midway, pressed home his attack on the heavy cruiser Mikuma despite fatal wounds from Japanese anti-aircraft fire. His posthumous Medal of Honor recognized the individual courage that characterized American resistance throughout the Pacific Campaign, transforming desperate defense into ultimate victory through personal sacrifice and professional excellence. 3. Tactical lessons emerging from the carrier battle would reshape naval warfare for generations. The decisive role of intelligence, the importance of coordinated attacks, and the vulnerability of surface vessels to air attack had been demonstrated with mathematical precision that left no room for doctrinal debate. The silence that settled over the Pacific battlefield on the evening of June 4, 1942, carried profound implications that would resonate throughout the remainder of World War II and beyond. Admiral Yamamoto, receiving reports of his carrier force's destruction aboard the super battleship Yamato, confronted the collapse of Japanese naval supremacy and the beginning of America's inexorable advance toward Tokyo Bay. The strategic transformation, accomplished in a single day's fighting, defied every pre-war prediction about Pacific naval warfare. Japan had lost 4 fleet carriers, their most experienced pilots, and the offensive capability that had carried the Rising Sun from Pearl Harbor to the gates of Australia. More importantly, the Imperial Navy had sacrificed irreplaceable assets. While American industrial capacity was just beginning to reach wartime production levels, Admiral Nimitz, reviewing damage assessments and casualty reports at Pearl Harbor, recognized that Midway represented far more than a tactical victory. The battle had demonstrated American ability to match Japanese professional excellence through superior intelligence gathering, strategic flexibility, and individual courage under impossible circumstances. These advantages would only increase as the war continued and American resources reached full mobilization. The human cost of victory remained sobering, despite the strategic triumph. Torpedo Squadron 8 had been virtually annihilated, their crews paying the ultimate price for tactical decisions that proved both suicidal and strategically vital. Yorktown lay crippled and would eventually sink despite heroic damage control efforts, taking with her irreplaceable equipment and experienced personnel. Yet the mathematical reality of the exchange favored America by margins that would prove decisive throughout the Pacific Campaign. Japanese losses included not only 4 carriers and their aircraft, but also the elite pilot cadre that represented years of training and irreplaceable combat experience. American pilot losses, while tragic, could be replaced by the massive training programs already underway across the continental United States. Lieutenant Commander John Thatch, whose innovative fighter tactics had helped American pilots survive against superior Japanese aircraft, embodied the adaptive thinking that would characterize American military development throughout the war. His Thak-weave defensive formation multiplied the effectiveness of inferior American fighters against technically superior Japanese Zeros, demonstrating how tactical innovation could overcome equipment disadvantages. The intelligence triumph, achieved by Commander Rochefort's cryptanalytic team, established precedents for information warfare that would influence military operations into the modern era. The ability to read enemy communications and predict their intentions had provided decisive advantages that transformed desperate defense into overwhelming victory. These lessons would guide Allied code-breaking efforts throughout the remainder of the global conflict. As chronicled in official Navy histories compiled by the Naval War College, the Battle of Midway marked the turning point in Pacific naval warfare and established the template for American victory in World War II. Intelligence gathering, industrial capacity, technological innovation, and individual courage had combined to defeat what many considered the world's most formidable naval force. Admiral Spruance's tactical decisions during the battle reflected the kind of aggressive, yet calculated risk-taking that would characterize successful American commanders throughout the war. His willingness to continue attacking despite potential losses demonstrated the offensive mindset necessary to defeat entrenched Japanese positions across thousands of Pacific islands. The broader implications of Midway's outcome extended far beyond the immediate Pacific theater. Germany's Axis partner had suffered a crippling defeat that reduced Japanese ability to threaten Allied supply lines or support European operations. The psychological impact on neutral nations was equally significant, demonstrating that the Axis powers were not invincible and encouraging continued resistance to Japanese expansion. The legacy of those 4 days in June 1942 would echo through subsequent decades of military history, establishing principles of naval aviation, intelligence warfare, and strategic planning that remain relevant in contemporary conflicts. The young men who died in Pacific waters had purchased victory at the ultimate cost, their sacrifice transforming the trajectory of global warfare and securing the foundation for Allied triumph in World War II.